Okay, we are with Seb Bunney, and I'm thrilled to have this chat. Seb, we were introduced, I guess, kind of through a mutual friend. An email got flipped back and forth from Jeff, and we got this introduction. So we really appreciate you being here. And Seb, for those people who don't know you, I just want to start. How does somebody go from mountain biking to writing a book called The Hidden Cost of Money? How does this happen?
Oh, well, first off, Tom, I truly appreciate you having me on. It really means a lot. Our mutual friend, kind of Jeff, he reached out to me after I released my book, The Hidden Cost of Money, and was just like, "Hey, I'm a psychologist. I'm interested in kind of what you're doing, and I'd love to connect you with this guy, Tom." And I was like, "Absolutely." And so I just want to also just thank the Bitcoin community, because it never ceases to amaze me just how people are so open and just want to support one another. But I would say, like, I never in my wildest dreams expected to write a book. I've always been a mountain individual. I've loved being in the mountains. I've loved being able to move my body and just feel those endorphins and just get out there. But alongside that, I've also really enjoyed teaching. And so from a young age, at 14, I moved out to Canada and I got all my instructing qualifications and started teaching mountain biking. And I love just supporting people in their own little journey and seeing that thrill when people are moving their body and they're learning. After a decade of teaching, my body was pretty worn out. It was struggling, and I realized.
Before you go further there, but your parents were okay with you leaving home at 14?
It's an interesting situation where I would say my mum, unfortunately, my mum came from a bit of a troubled family. She was kicked out of the house at like 13 years old, and she recognized the importance of independence. And she saw that the schooling system wasn't supporting me. I was motivated and driven. It's not as if I was going down the path of partying and drugs. I was motivated and driven, and mountain biking to me was my outlet. All I wanted to do was ride. And she realized that this person's got a passion and he's motivated. I'm going to let him do what he needs to do. And so I moved out here when I was 14. I spent the summer when I was 14. I spent the winter back in the UK, summer again when I was 15, and then moved out here full time. And I just felt as if that's what I needed to do at that age. Being in the schooling system would have condensed me. It would have compressed me into a box. And that ultimately led me to where I am today, where I realized after leaving traditional academia, it actually allowed me to expand and kind of go down the rabbit holes that I wanted to go down. I felt that traditional academia, when I was in the schooling system, didn't really support me. It didn't allow me to pursue the things that motivated me. And the moment I'd left, I realized actually I can learn. I just need to be able to learn about the things that motivate and interest me. And then I started going down the route of like mountain biking and psychology and our monetary system and investing. And to that point, which you made earlier, how did I go from writing a book from being a mountain bike instructor? And the reality is that as a mountain bike instructor, our monetary world plays a huge role in how we're able to show up. And all of a sudden, I'm working as a teenager with these idols, the Tiger Woods of the mountain bike world. So I'm seeing these individuals that are in the biggest movies, that are the stars, and they're struggling financially. Most of them don't have property. Most of them are renting. Most of them are struggling with their kind of cost of living. And this really opened my eyes. I realized that if I want to kind of pursue this life, be my best self, well, I've got to have a passive income stream. I've got to have something that's supporting me outside of my mountain biking to be able to pursue mountain biking. And that ultimately led me to real estate. I feel really lucky where I live in Whistler, British Columbia. House prices were a hell of a lot cheaper 10, 15 years ago. And so I was able to get a small little 2-bedroom long-term rental property here in the village.
No way. In Whistler.
In Whistler, a little 2-bedroom right in the village of Whistler. And so that helped me out immensely.
I'm sure it did. Good for you. Congratulations. Great. Yeah.
And then I just did the typical like long-term rental. I ended up leveraging that when that had appreciated, and I was able to go and purchase another 3-bedroom little long-term rental in Pemberton, about 30 minutes from Whistler. And then I eventually rolled that into a couple rental properties in the States. And so from there, it kind of my little rental empire was growing. Yeah. But I was realizing, I was like, man, I notice all of my friends around me, our wages are pretty much stagnant and house prices just keep on climbing and keep on climbing and keep on climbing. And this really, it made me dig beneath the surface. I realized that real estate isn't what our parents used to invest in. Real estate isn't what our grandparents used to invest in. Something has shifted. And that's when I started looking at the monetary system. And the monetary system, immediately when I dug into it, I was just like, this system is rigged. This system, we don't have a free market. We've got nothing close to a free market. We've got an artificial market where interest rates are set by central banks. And this really made me question, is this the world I want to live in? And that eventually led me to Bitcoin. And I felt that the skill set that I've developed through teaching mountain biking, which is basically distilling down these complex subjects, whether that's doing a jump, learning how to backflip, doing a corner, you name it, distilling down these complex biomechanical movements into their simplest form. I took that and I started to teach about finance and really speak to the layperson. So distilling down these complex macroeconomic financial kind of terms and distilling it down and speaking to the layperson. Because my background, I'm speaking to everyday Joe Blogs. I'm speaking to everyday business people. And so I wanted to be able to do that for macroeconomics, finance, Bitcoin, money, you name it.
Okay, so it's never really hit me until right now. Are you the guy that I think our mutual friend Greg sent me a video of somebody jumping with a mountain bike jumping over a train?
Yeah.
Is that you?
Yeah, that's my 20-year-old self. That's not me anymore.
Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, that's you? Holy smokes. Okay, I didn't realize that was your 20-year-old self, but I thought that was a current, well, you're not that. How old are you?
I'm 31.
You're 31. Okay, so it was, I remember him sending me that idea. Seb, I had no idea. This is blowing my mind because one day he sends this video saying, you got to check this guy out because then you met him. We can get into it because you started an education company together and that kind of thing. But okay, so you go down this path, you're learning this stuff. On the real estate front, I'm just curious, have your views then changed on real estate because it served you really well?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So like, how are you kind of justifying that, or how are you kind of internalizing that with your thoughts of real estate today?
So I would say, and this is something that we briefly touched on before we kind of hit record, which is money at its like primary form is meant to serve three functions. It's meant to be a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. Well, let's just forget about those second two for a second and focus on the first one, a store of value. Money is meant to serve as a store of value. And as society advances, which is what we've been doing basically since the dawn of time, we've always been striving for more, increasing productivity, increasing efficiency. As that happens, prices should naturally fall because we're increasing our ability to generate value from our resources, our time, you name it. But the reality is that if we look at our prices keep on rising. Inflation keeps on happening, and it means that our cost of living is getting harder and harder and harder to get by. And so the reality is that our money does not serve as a store of value anymore, given that we have a central bank that can increase the amount of monetary units there are in circulation at any time. And so over time, because our money no longer serves as a store of value, well, it's not like we're just going to spend our money or just keep it in this kind of monetary unit that's devaluing, like the Canadian dollar or the US dollar or any other fiat currency. So instead, we're incentivized to go and find another monetary unit. Real estate has now become that monetary unit. People are simply using real estate as a means to store value. And so over time, we've seen capital flood from the currency, from savers into real estate, driving up real estate prices. And so we have these artificially elevated prices because money doesn't serve as a store of value. That's not natural. What that ends up doing is pushes all of these individuals that are trying to get into real estate to put a roof over their head and trying to support their kids, support their loved ones. They now can't afford it because all of this capital is flooding into real estate as a simple store of value. And where I live here in Whistler, a little while back, there was a study, and it's something like 61% of houses are empty in Whistler. People are not using them for even long-term rentals. They're simply using them to store value. And we see this in London. There's something like 100,000 properties are empty in London when there's a housing crisis. And again, this is a byproduct of a broken monetary system. And so when I really started to recognize this, it opened my eyes to realizing that, hey, there's something wrong with the money. Our monetary system isn't supporting us in the way that we need, and it's creating these byproducts where people are seeking to store their value elsewhere. We're also seeing it in farmland. Farmland is being bought up left, right, and center. And instead of that farmland being used to add value to society, growing crops, growing things that allow us to sustain ourselves, it's simply being used as a store of value, and it's no longer being used as a farm, its intended purpose. And so this is impacting society. It's impacting society immeasurably. And that's where I realized that, okay, we've got to have a monetary system that supports us, which eventually led me to Bitcoin. And Bitcoin being a monetary system with a fixed supply. So given that you've got a fixed supply, as we see greater adoption, as society advances, as we see increases in productivity, efficiency, you name it, prices start to fall in relation to Bitcoin, or Bitcoin's price rises. So as a Bitcoiner, as someone who is investing in Bitcoin, all of a sudden your world becomes easier. Your cost of living is falling in relation to Bitcoin. House prices are falling in relation to Bitcoin. You can save simply by storing your value in Bitcoin. You no longer have all of the other expenses associated with real estate. You don't have to deal with mortgages. You don't have to deal with all of the repairs. You don't have to deal with tenants. You name it. And so it's so much simpler when money acts as a store of value, which it's intended or should be doing.
It seems so obvious when I'm just hearing you speak, and it just seems so obvious when you break it down like that, so beautifully and so simply. It's astonishing to me that it's so difficult to get the masses or majority to understand some of these concepts. But then I guess if I look at my own life and my own journey, I discounted a lot of this stuff for many years. Like I kind of looked at it and dismissed it, didn't look into the details of what it was, didn't really understand things. I think it's kind of tempting to judge people now when I understand these things, because I'll look around and I don't understand why the adoption of it isn't even faster, although it is happening faster and faster. Sometimes I just personally will get a bit frustrated thinking, why is this not happening even faster than the current rate of adoption? But I think everybody has to come to this at their own time. And I think people are so busy working in the existing system where, to your point, nominal prices just keep going up and up and up. And people have to work one job or two jobs to support a family. They don't really have time to read some of these concepts to understand what's happening right in front of them. And I think I guess that would be part of the hidden cost of money. Would you agree that the masses just can't see what's right in front of them?
I couldn't agree more. And I think that the reality is that a lot of this has been obfuscated from us. If you actually look at the definition of inflation from, I think it was like 1970, 1980 and before, if you'd looked at the definition of inflation in the dictionary, it was inflation is an increase in monetary units resulting in an increase in prices. And the government changed the definition of inflation post 1980 to inflation is a rise in prices. So what that does, by removing that whole what inflation is an increase in monetary units, you can now say, hey, we've got this beast we need to fight. This is inflation. And I'm going to print $2 trillion under the Inflation Reduction Act in order to be able to fight inflation. That's nonsensical. It doesn't work. And so I think the reality is there was a famous speech, and I've completely forgotten the guy's name, but he started out by saying there's two fish swimming in the water, and an old fish swims by and says to the two fish, how's your day going? Well, how's the water? And the two fish look at each other and they're like, what's water? And the reality is that we don't know the world at which we live in, these things that we interact with day to day, and we just use day to day. We don't even question them. And I think money is one of those things that it's like the air we breathe. We don't think it can be any different. We just think money is the way that it is. And so it's not until you start going down the rabbit hole of money that you start to realize that actually there's many hidden costs to money. Money really does weave its influence into our social sphere, how we show up. It weaves its influence into our environmental sphere, whether we're incentivized to consume or save, whether the political sphere, whether or not those in positions of power are able to act on their own behalf, or whether or not they have to listen to their populace. And so money really does influence so many aspects of society. And it's not until you go down that rabbit hole that you start to realize this.
I have a few other questions for you on that. But before we leave the real estate subject, from your understanding of real estate and your understanding of the money system, do you ever foresee a situation where real estate prices really come down very much in nominal, in dollar terms? And the reason I'm asking you that is because we're in the real estate space, I always see these real estate bears who say the real estate must collapse. And if I argue against that, they will think that I am being a typical real estate person who thinks real estate just goes up. But what I'm really trying to share is that in dollar terms, I can't see how the government and the powers that be allow real estate prices to come down when there's just more and more dollars being printed and a shortage of housing in this country, as many countries, a shortage of housing in this country. When I share that to you, is there a situation under the current system where you think real estate prices come down in any meaningful fashion?
So under the current system, no. I think that what we will end up seeing is, given that we've got so much debt, those in positions of power are incentivized to intervene because of the burden of debt. If we let this start to collapse, if we raise interest rates too quickly, all of a sudden we're going to feel that pain. People are going to start defaulting. People are going to try and access capital to be able to support their liabilities. We're going to see the real estate market very much quickly crumble. And because of that, I don't believe those in positions of power are going to let that happen. I think we're going to see greater and greater intervention before that happens.
So then where does this go ahead? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just about to say, but the reality is that I do see a future. If we were to say, and obviously we can get more into the kind of the Bitcoin space, the Bitcoin kind of talk later on. But if we were to see a country adopt Bitcoin, or many nation states start to adopt Bitcoin, I truly believe that house prices would be 70, 80% less than what they are today. And the reason why I say that is because, first off, you guys have had Jeff Booth come and talk, and Jeff Booth talks about this deflationary world. Our world is inherently deflationary. And what we mean by that, and I briefly touched on it a second ago, is that humans have always been striving to get more for less. If you take Netflix versus Blockbuster, within 3 quarters of having its biggest quarter, was basically bankrupt. And Netflix, all it did was turn a DVD business into an online business, and it completely decimated this incredible, huge business. And when you start looking at Blockbuster, you used to have to drive down to Blockbuster, spending gas, spend 30 minutes in Blockbuster picking up.
Couldn't get the new release. Couldn't get the new release. Yeah.
Absolutely. You spend your $8 renting your Blockbuster movie. You drive all the way home. You watch the movie. You start to realize the DVD's scratched. You got to drive back to Blockbuster, drop it off, and now Netflix, for pretty much the same price, you've got, at a touch of a button, you've got millions and millions of movies. And so that's just a perfect example of humans striving to always get more for less. And so when you actually start looking at advancement in technology, prices in many industries are falling by around 5 to 15% per year. So let's just take the middle ground of that, 10%. So 10%, if you compare that to real estate, you compare it to equities, you compare it to bonds, well, bonds have been going annualized over the last 100 years. They've been going up by about 4 to 5%. If you take equities, they've been going up by about 8 to 9%. And real estate has been going up, depending on obviously where you're at, around 7 to 8%. So 7 to 8%, 8 to 9%, and 4 to 5% is less than if we had a monetary system with a fixed supply and prices were falling. At just the rate of technological advancement, prices should be falling at 10 to 50, like 10% a year. So all of a sudden you realize if you've just got a monetary system that supports falling prices, you're incentivized to simply just save in the monetary system. You would actually outperform real estate, equities, and bonds by simply saving in the monetary system. But how much capital are we actually talking about? When you look at Bitcoin right now is worth something around like $1 to $1.5 trillion. Real estate globally has like $350 trillion worth of capital in real estate. Equities has another $150 trillion of capital. Bonds have another. Absolutely. And then the derivatives market, options, futures, you name it, are like $1 quadrillion. This money is only in these assets because, as we talked about, money doesn't act as a store of value. So all of a sudden, if you had a monetary unit, a monetary system that supported individuals with a fixed supply and allowed advancement in technology, productivity to allow prices to fall, a lot of that capital that's locked in assets would suddenly start flooding back into the currency. And so that's what I see is, in an ideal world, house prices would be a hell of a lot cheaper because house prices would be based upon the cost to create the house.
Yeah, the utility value of the house. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. The utility value of the house, the cost to create the house, plus a little bit of a premium for desirable places such as Whistler, ski resorts, you name it. But it wouldn't be the same premium that we have today because the majority of capital has left the currency unit and straight into assets such as real estate.
So when you've gotten really deep into this subject, has this given you more peace with your understanding of the money system or created more frustration for you?
Oh, it's 100% frustration.
I was going to say, because you articulate this stuff. I don't know if it's your accent or what, but you articulate this stuff so beautifully. You do just a beautiful job of breaking down complex subjects. And I'm sitting here listening to you. I'm like, Seb's got it all together. He's just at peace with this. And sometimes, and anyone who's listening to this knows that I speak like this. Sometimes I just get so frustrated because I feel like the current system is like robbing so many of my friends from the high purpose of, their highest and best use in life is being robbed from them because they're being forced to work one job or two jobs instead of sharing with the world what they could be sharing. And if they were sharing what they could be sharing with all of us, the world would be a better place. And they can't do it because they don't have a monetary unit that goes up in value. Like you're saying, they have a monetary unit that goes down in value and they're kind of lost in this world. And that just, for whatever reason, it deeply frustrates me. And I sometimes hate to admit that, Seb, because I think some people think I walk around like with this kind of like negative kind of feeling, but I do maybe have that. Like I'm a positive person and I see the positive that's coming from Bitcoin. And I really am grateful for what Bitcoin is bringing to all of us. But at the same time, because you've peeked behind the curtain, it just is a little bit frustrating. I asked this question last week to Max Hillenbrand. Do you know Max Hillenbrand?
Yep.
And he said the same thing because he was speaking so eloquently as you are. And I'm like, Max, does this frustrate you? And he answered the same way that you did, Seb. He's like, oh yeah, absolutely.
It's, you know what?
I'm happy to hear, as sad as this sounds, I'm just happy to hear that you have a little bit of frustration in you too, that I'm not alone. You know,
no, and the analogy.
I know there's many of us that are not alone who are Bitcoiners who think like this.
and the analogy that I give as an athlete is I think about it. If you're fueling an athlete with freaking McDonald's and processed foods, you understand the potential that the athlete could have, but they're not able to reach that potential because they don't have the nutrients. And the reality is that that's the world we live in today. We're fueled by fiat currencies that are massively impacting our performance and our ability to show up authentically and express ourselves because we're simply trying to survive. And you know what? I had dinner last night with a couple friends, and they were talking about how frustrated they are living here in Whistler. And for those that aren't familiar, Whistler is
I can only imagine.
It's a world-class ski resort, but because it's a world-class ski resort, it's a desirable place to live. So we see a lot of money coming in and buying up real estate. So real estate here, the average house price is something, I think the average single family home is between like $2.5 to $4 million. Like it's just mind blowing. It's out of reach for 99% of people. But what they were talking about is we have this thing called the Whistler Housing Authority, and they have affordable houses and they artificially cap the appreciation of or property appreciation. And houses, you can buy 2-3 bedroom apartments for $300,000. The wait list takes 10 years to be on the wait list to be able to get up there and have that opportunity. But they're talking about this as in like they need to open up more properties so that we can have more locals living in town and da. But the reality is that it's not the problem, that they're not looking at the root. The root is actually house prices would be a hell of a lot cheaper if we had a monetary system that actually supported people. At the moment, by simply adding in more and more regulation, more and more intervention, artificial suppression of real estate prices, rental restrictions, all this stuff, these are just kind of band-aids on top of the root problem. And so that's where it's like, how do we shift people's perspective to stop looking at the band-aids and shift it to the root problem, which is our monetary system? And that's kind of to your point earlier. Most people, they don't see the water at which we swim. They're only seeing the fish around them and how people are struggling. And so we often place blame on maybe the wrong areas.
Yeah, they're battling the second order of effects of the problem and not getting to the root of the problem. But you know what? Listening to you speak, sorry, I know I keep bringing this up, but listening to you speak gives me such hope because I'm like, holy shit, here's Seb out there in Whistler giving mountain bike lessons. And for anyone who's open to it, he's going to be talking about Bitcoin. So if you're doing that out there and we all have friends doing it around the world, I feel like there is this momentum shift and a mindset shift that is happening. So that on the flip side of me explaining how frustrating things can be, there is this positive side where you just knowing that you're out there existing, Seb, speaking the way you are, gives me kind of like this hope. But just to extrapolate this out a little bit, if real estate prices just continue to get out of reach, like, and I don't want to get doomsday-ish or anything, but I just feel the system has to end in this like epic, nasty sort of collapse. Like, I guess I'm trying to weigh two scenarios. Something I think Jeff Booth talks about is like one will just slowly die and Bitcoin is like the life raft and it'll slowly pick up, kind of almost like landlines disappeared and voice over IP. We all started using data and Skype and, you know, the old landline just disappeared. And I sometimes wonder if that is going to play out like that, or do things kind of increase where the frustration in society reaches a point where there's some kind of boiling point, some kind of event, some kind of like mass revolt against the system. Do you ever think about that at all, or no, it doesn't really cross your mind?
No, I 100% think about that. And it's really interesting because I think that when you look back throughout history, there are these tipping points where at a certain point, people can no longer support the debt burden, or there is just too much social tension that it creates revolution. And we have seen these tipping points many, many, many times throughout history. The interesting point is, it's really hard to predict at what point will that tipping point happen. And so there's a famous saying when it comes to investing, which is the markets can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent. And I think that this is the same for intervention. Those in positions of power, central banks, you name it, they can limp along for way longer than we can expect. The fall of the Roman Empire took decades and decades and decades. Like we're looking at fiat currencies, and we came off the kind of the gold standard in 1971. We're 50 years into this thing, and We've deteriorated
We're still
a lot.
going.
We're still going. And people still say, like Joe Biden, that the US is the strongest as ever. And it's just like, I don't see it. And I think the other thing that's really challenging is we can't actually see the truth as to the health of the economy, because all of the data which we are given is pretty much falsified. You look at CPI, you look at housing data, you look at employments, like the employment reports, you name it. So much of that data is so manipulated. And I think that more and more, it's just going to impact our ability to make decisions. The analogy that I give is I look at money like language as a medium of expression. It's how we express to the world what it is that we value. If you go into a grocery store and you see someone buying grass-fed meat and organic vegetables and someone else buying microwave meals and cigarettes, you can see what they value through what it is that they're purchasing. If I'm going out and purchasing mountain bikes, someone else is going and purchasing art, you can see what it is that they value through what it is that they're purchasing. So how we spend our money is an expression of what we value. Now, the problem is also, like language, money can be censored. And so inflation is a form of censorship. If I go out and I work incredibly hard and I want to go and spend my money, but all of a sudden prices have risen 50%, then all of a sudden my purchasing power doesn't go as far. I can't express myself to the extent that I was able to express myself. It's limiting my ability to express myself. And not only that, when you have something like inflation, those in positions of power who are in charge of the money printers that are creating this inflation, they're taking that purchasing power that was once yours, that you may have spent on mountain biking, or you may have spent on grass-fed beef, and they're then directing it where they see fit. So it may be towards war. And so the reality is that how we express ourselves is being distorted. If as a society we're seeing tons and tons of capital flooding towards war, then you can see holistically, well, this means that society supports war. That's not necessarily true. When we have a monetary system where the central bank can print money, ultimately they can dictate where capital flows in society. That's in a free market. Ultimately, capital only flows to where value is being created. And so I think a lot less capital in a free market would flow towards war and other endeavors, but we don't realize that. And what that means is that how do we as individuals make important decisions about what industries are actually offering value in society, what businesses should be alive, what jobs should exist. We can't see any of this because ultimately stimulus and intervention is artificially propping up businesses. It's artificially propping up jobs. It's artificially creating these industries that shouldn't exist. And so ultimately it actually impedes society's ability to flourish, because we can't make important decisions because we don't actually have any clarity as to what should exist, what shouldn't, what's fragile, what's not, you name it.
Yeah, I love that framing. I never thought of inflation as censorship. It's almost like it's a censoring the proper economic signal so that entrepreneurs can't figure out what people are valuing because that expression is being censored. And because that expression is being censored, then you have a system that we call capitalism that is not really acting like capitalism because, first of all, people are not forming pools of capital because it's difficult to save. Why would you save up capital? You're going to buy a house that goes up in nominal terms instead of saving up the capital. Then you can't deploy the capital properly because the economic signal is distorted. To your point, inflation's going up. People can't express themselves with purity so that if I'm the entrepreneur, I don't really see what people are valuing. I kind of see what they're forced to value. That makes me misallocate the capital. It distorts the whole system.
100%. 100%. I was just going to add one more point, which is, and you see this censorship is not just inflation, capital controls as well. Like if you live in China, let's just say you're in a middle class family, you're able to support your kids to a certain extent, and you realize that, hey, you know what, money's losing its value. I want to go store my value outside of the country, go and maybe invest in real estate in Whistler, which is a lot of Chinese individuals do. So I'm going to go put my capital externally outside of China. Well, guess what? They put in a lot of capital controls that prevent that because they realize that the more capital that flees the country, the less the government is able to intervene to the extent they may want to. And so ultimately, that then impedes your ability to save your value, store your value to be able to support your family. So again, it's impacting your ability to express yourself. And then we also see it in restrictions on where we can direct capital. There may be certain industries you want to invest in, but you're impeded in your ability to do so. Bitcoin is a perfect example. We've only just seen greater adoption of Bitcoin when it comes to the ETFs and the changes in the accounting standards in the US. But before last year, or before the start of this year, it was very unfavorable as a corporation to invest in Bitcoin because of regulation impeding your ability to invest in Bitcoin. So ultimately, our monetary environment is impacting our ability to express ourselves and what we value. And if the analogy, again, tying it back to the average individual, how we grow up, if as a child, our parents didn't allow us to express certain emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, if our parents didn't allow us to express those emotions, what happens? It leads to depression. It leads to anxiety. Depression is just the depressing of emotions. And so I think that when we have a society that cannot express themselves monetarily, we can't direct our capital to where we see fit, society starts to break down. You start to see environmental degradation because people are incentivized to consume. You start to see a breakdown in the political scene because those in positions of power can fund operations without support from the populace because they're a money printer. We see a breakdown in the parent-child bond because parents are having to work more because their money is worth less, so they're spending less time with their kids. Their kids aren't getting their emotional needs met. All of these things are byproducts of a monetary system that is no longer allowing people to express themselves freely.
Jeez. And it feels like, I think I heard you say this. Was this you said it, and it kind of struck me that like with every other form of information, because if prices are a form of economic information and money is the way that we're kind of, measuring that price, if I send you an email attachment with a PDF to anywhere in the world, someone's going to be able to open up that PDF. Yet, I recently had to send somebody American dollars for something that we were doing down in Florida, and out of Canada, to send someone American dollars, it feels like it was 1980. Like I might as well get the dollars from the bank and drive to Florida. That's how it felt. Like even with PayPal, it's like to get them the American dollars. And it's the only form of information in the year 2024 that I feel is so restricted. Like it seems ridiculous. I can send somebody a video. I can send somebody an email. I can send somebody an attachment to an email. I can send someone all these forms of information. But the form of information of money, it's like there's all these, like you said, capital controls, these weird controls on it. And it just seems so old, so ancient. It suddenly feels like it's, to your language again, depressing proper economic signal. And it's wanting to be free. I feel like as Bitcoin as a form of technology just eventually just breaks through this. And I'm sure you feel the same way, that Bitcoin has the ability over time to just circumvent some of these controls. Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. Because I would say that when you look at a controlling structure, whether it's a nation state, a government, you name it, one of the most powerful things they have is their money. If you prevent capital from fleeing the country, all of a sudden you can degrade quality of life. You can fund operations without support from the populace very quickly, and you can do it effectively. And so one of the most powerful tools is our monetary system, and governments recognize that. And what that means is that it basically kneecaps the free market. It kneecaps capitalism, because if we take a step back, what is capitalism? What is a free market? Well, what a free market is that, hey, if you start a business and you are offering value, then all of a sudden capital is going to start flowing towards you. If someone else starts a business and they are not offering value, capital is not going to flow to them. They're going to wither away, and another company is going to rise up. It's the same with nation states. If a nation state is offering a favorable jurisdiction where quality of life is great and people are thriving, then in a free market, capital should start flowing to them. People will start leaving their jurisdiction and moving towards that jurisdiction that's offering value. But when you have a system of fiat currencies where they need to contain capital within inside their borders to be able to devalue the currency, well, all of a sudden, if capital starts leaving your borders, you're going to quickly act, such as we've seen with China, such as we've seen with many countries, such as we've seen with Canada. Canada has an exit tax of, I think 40%. So it makes it very hard for people to move to where value is being created. And so I think that what's fascinating about Bitcoin is, for the first time in history, we have an intangible digital asset. This is truly incredible. It means that for the first time in history, capital can flow to where value is being created, and there's no way for the government to impede it. Every other asset that we have, it may be intangible, but it's still held by either third parties, or it is tangible like real estate and it's physically located. And what this means is, well, if it's tangible and you've got real estate, you've got gold, you've got resources, they can be seized very easily. It's very hard for us to move physical resources across borders. And if they're digital, well, we can hold bonds, we can hold equities, we can hold cash in the bank. Well, guess what? They're all held by third parties. They're all held by institutions that ultimately are regulated by the government. So if the government wants to seize our assets, they can seize our assets. And we've seen this happen, such as the trucker rally during the pandemic. So any time that we want to be able to move our value, it's very hard for us to do so. Bitcoin, on the other hand, We can store 12 words in our head, walk across a border naked, and have $1 billion of value in our head, and no one has any idea we have it in our head. And so what all of a sudden happens is you're forcing a free market. You're allowing capital to move without those having oversight or purview into that movement of capital. And so this is, I genuinely believe, one of the most profound, underrated aspects of Bitcoin is that it allows value to move to where value is being created. And that, I think, is incredible, because it will allow nation states that are offering favorable environments to thrive, and nation states that are no longer offering favorable environments over the long time span, this isn't happening in a year, to slowly wither away, because as capital leaves their jurisdiction, they can't fund themselves. They're going to have to intervene more, which means quality of life is going to degrade, which means more people are incentivized to leave. And so this is big scale.
I love the examples that you use there, because sometimes I think of people who are invested in the stock market, and I think, oh my gosh, the way I look at it is different than the way they would look at it, because I think if they have some Apple stock or some Tesla stock or whatever stock that they have that they might like you really have only dollar exposure to that stock, because if shit was to hit the fan in the banking system and you were trying to get those shares, you're not getting those shares. You're going to be cashed out to Canadian dollars. And in that process of, let's say it takes you 48 hours, 3 days, 5 days, if there's some kind of financial crisis and they kind of lock down the banks a little bit, the inflation rate of the dollars in those 5 days might be through the roof. So you might be sold out. So you think you're kind of safe owning these things, but because you don't custody them yourself, you are really getting the price exposure to these things. But if you were then to try to take the shares yourself, you're not getting them. And to me, I don't know if people have really thought that through, because with Bitcoin, you have direct, like you said, 12 words in your head, 24 words in your head. You have direct custody of this thing, of this pure digital scarcity. And when I had that realization, it was really eye-opener for me. I'm like, holy smokes, in my life, I have very little custody of anything of value. Bitcoin's one of the only things that I can truly custody that has pure digital scarcity in the world, but pure scarcity in the world, never mind digital scarcity. So it's this kind of wonderful thing. When you, in your book, when you're talking about the link between money and behavior, can you talk about that? I know we've been kind of alluding to different things here, but can you talk about that a little more? Why did you write a chapter on the link between money and behavior?
So this goes back to this kind of idea that we were discussing at the start, where money really does weave its influence into every aspect of the world around us. And that includes how we show up as individuals. And so sometimes people can struggle to understand, well, how is our money actually changing how we're showing up? And I'm sure as I start to talk about this, you'll notice, hey, this is what I've been feeling. I've noticed a change in behavior around my friends, myself, you name it. And I couldn't quite put my finger on where it was coming from. And a lot of it stems from our monetary system. So there's kind of 3 areas that I like to dive into. But I bet if you think about it, there's many other areas. And so the first one is just what Bitcoin is referred to as time preference. So time preference is, do I have a high time preference? Am I focused on meeting my impulsive needs, meeting what I want right now? Or do I have a low time preference, which is, am I focused on the future? Am I focused on building security and prosperity? And when we have a monetary system that is losing value over time, our purchasing power is greatest in the present moment. So all of a sudden, we're actually incentivized to consume, given that our money goes furthest right now. And so it's shifting our time preference. It's shifting our time preference to consuming in the present, given that our purchasing power is greatest right now. A monetary system like Bitcoin is the inverse. Because over time, as we see greater adoption, as we see advancement in productivity, efficiency, you name it, and prices start to fall, well, we're now incentivized to save because our purchasing power is greater in the future. We're incentivized to think about, man, what do I want? How do I want to show up in the world? If I want to be able to support my family, what does that look like? And so all of a sudden we're incentivized to have that low time preference, thinking about how you want your trajectory, what you want to do as a career, how you want to grow, you name it. And so all of a sudden our monetary system is shaping whether we're being impulsive, whether we're focusing on the now and consuming, or whether or not we're thinking about the future and thinking about security, stability, which ultimately that impacts society. If we have a society that's long-term thinking, well, naturally, I think we have a much more stable society. We have an impulsive society. We have a society that is a lot more consumer-based. That impacts the environment, you name it. Yeah, it's mind-blowing. And so I would say the second point is looking at, a complete mind block on what I call it.
That's okay. Just on that point, I just love the idea that, like, if I could sit down and think, I just feel like in today's world, for example, right now, Rockstar, we have a bunch of people who are constantly thinking about interest rates, constantly thinking about the house of pricing, constantly thinking how to help people protect themselves from the loss of their purchasing power. And imagine we directed all that mind power into the economy with a longer term vision focused on entirely different matters. But instead, and I'm not trying to say here at Rockstar we have the most brilliant minds. We do have some pretty smart people, but in general, and others, I'm not talking about myself, other people here, but imagine we could unleash that mind power into the economy to productive use instead of to defensive near-term use. Like, imagine this place didn't have to exist and all the people that were here could be focused on things where they can produce value. If they produce enough value, they save money. They can take time to think on how to produce more value. It's a much more peaceful life and a much better expression of their own life. And instead, I kind of feel like we're running in circles at all times. So to 100%. Hear you, yeah, like it just seems like it's not only a misallocation of capital, it's like a misallocation of human power, human potential. And I know you're saying that, like, I know I'm repeating what you're saying, but like, it's just.
No, and to your point, I'd say to your point, which is, because our money is losing value, not only we're incentivized to consume, we're incentivized to try and invest and do whatever we can to generate returns to outpace inflation and debasement.
Yeah.
And so as a result,
like you're running on this treadmill all the time.
Mm-hmm. And so as a result, all of our capacity is going towards, how do I just protect myself? How do I defend myself? And if you think about how big the financialized world is, how many jobs are in investment banking? How many jobs are in banking? How many jobs are in freaking tax accountancy? How many jobs are in financial advisory services? You name it. All of this stuff is a result of a broken monetary system. We can simply, in a world such as Bitcoin, in a world that, adopts Bitcoin, all of a sudden, we can simply just save in the currency. We don't have to do any of that, like, deep, hard work investing. Some people still will, 100%. People are always going to want to try and outperform. Yeah. But for the average individual, if they simply just save in the currency, they're going to be totally fine. And that is profound. That saves so much mental capacity to direct towards family, friends, pursuits that actually motivate individuals. Which brings me to kind of the second point, which I remember now, is meaninglessness and apathy. And the challenge we face today, and bring it back to real estate, is that when we try and show up in this world, when we're trying to build security, it's so freaking hard when I don't know what the cost of living is going to be 6 months, a year from now. I don't think I can afford a house when it's increasing at 10, 15, 20% a year. Like, it's very hard for individuals to plan. And so all of a sudden, if people can't plan because they don't have any clarity around the future price of things, well, all of a sudden, meaninglessness starts to set in. People can't find meaning in their life. When people are just working simply to survive, it's a very meaningless life when we don't really show up how we want to be able to show up. And so we're seeing highest rates of depression, highest rates of anxiety. We're seeing highest rates of drug use, suicide, homelessness, you name it. And what's interesting is, in psychology, there's this term called locus of control. And we either have an internal locus of control, which is where we believe that we have control over our trajectory, our future, our life, or we have an external locus of control, which is we've kind of given up. It's that the world ultimately governs our direction. We don't really have a say in our direction. And there's countless studies that look at people with an external locus of control tend to have much lower health outcomes, lower life expectancy, higher rates of depression, you name it. And the flip side is also true for people with an internal locus of control that believe they have control over their future. They have much greater health outcomes, longer life expectancy. And so you're starting to see how we perceive the world is actually shaping our health. It's shaping our stress levels. It's shaping all of these things that impact us on a human level. So our money is shaping how we show up. And then the final one, which I'll quickly just touch on, is just compassion and altruism. There's in psychology, there's something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's kind of a 5-tier pyramid. And that base of that pyramid is our basic needs, food and shelter. And then above that, we start to have relationships. And as we start to get up, we start to get into relationships, jobs, self-actualization, you name it. But the reality is that until we meet our basic need, which is food and shelter, we can't think about relationships. We can't think about connection. We can't think about giving back, compassion, you name it. And so in a society which is starting to break down, where our monetary system is impacting us, where our cost of living is rising, where rental prices are skyrocketing, where it's getting harder and harder to be able to meet our basic needs, food and shelter, all of a sudden we have less capacity to give back to society, give back to our kids, give back to family members, give back to friends. And so I feel as if in society, like the service industry is just dropping off. The quality of service is dropping off. We're seeing just our capacity to be able to give back and support others is just getting less and less and less. And you can feel it. And so this is, again, going back to money weaves its influence into how we show up in the world. It impacts whether we think long-term, whether we're focused on meeting our immediate needs. It impacts whether or not we have meaning or meaninglessness. It impacts whether we can be compassionate to the point which we want to be. And so this is where I think it's really important for us to recognize that money is more than just a medium of exchange. I would argue it's actually, it's like language. If we can't express ourselves, it hugely impacts how we show up.
Wow. I just thinking about, I have a 22-year-old son and an 18-year-old daughter, and both of them have been thinking about Bitcoin as long as I have, because as soon as I, just like you, Seb, I'm sure once I discovered Bitcoin, I couldn't stop talking about it. So they've been, talking about it and saving it and that kind of thing. And it's interesting when I was thinking about, my daughter at 18, 4 years, we're talking over over 20% of her life, which has been thinking about Bitcoin and saving in Bitcoin. And that to me gets me excited. I'm like, there's this younger generation, there's an older generation that is like funding different wars and doing all these kinds of things in the world, but they're getting older. But there's this younger generation that's literally growing up with Bitcoin. My son at 22 is 4 years since he's 18, he's been talking about Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So there is this kind of like positive energy coming in. And because they've been thinking about it so long, we sometimes talk about it as a unit of account. So I know it's been a store of value and we've talked medium of exchange, but when you start talking about Bitcoin as a unit of account, something really interesting happens, because then you can start pricing daily things. And that's when you really see what you were alluding to earlier on the productivity gains and the price of things falling. And I did this just, my wife was going to get a new car in the fall, and we just talked about it in Bitcoin terms and, what we were going to do. We're going to buy it, lease it, how we're going to do it. But for fun, we just kind of priced it in Bitcoin terms and just marked the date. And then that was the fall of 2023. So now in the spring of 2024, if you reprice it in Bitcoin terms, the price of that car has come in half. And as a family, we can discuss why that is, how that happened. And, the price of Bitcoin does move around in dollar terms and that kind of thing. But that opens up a whole new type of discussion where everybody's kind of shocked by that. Like, oh my gosh, the price of that car in Bitcoin terms came down by half. Mm-hmm. And I think once you can kind of make that leap into unit of account, which is difficult, like I still think in dollar terms, mm-hmm. but once you can get there, the world really starts to change, and you become very protective of your Bitcoin and where you're going to deploy your capital, where you're going to deploy your Bitcoin. And it's like this monster mind shift.
100%. And I was just going to make one quick point, which is, so since February, I've started working for a company based out of BC here called Block Rewards. And our whole goal with Block Rewards is to be able to have people compensated in Bitcoin. And so if you want a portion of your paycheck paid out in Bitcoin, awesome, you can do that. But my job is obviously the educational approach. Like, how do we support people in understanding Bitcoin? And the reality is that a lot of people look at Bitcoin through the lens of fiat. I want this asset to go up so I can just sell it back into fiat, and then I can go and support my fiat lifestyle.
Which is where everybody starts. Which is where everyone starts. Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is where everyone starts. Whereas most Bitcoiners, when you're deep down that rabbit hole, all of a sudden, you're not looking at the world through the lens of fiat. You're looking at the world through the lens of Bitcoin. And when you look at the world through the lens of Bitcoin, that's when prices start falling. And so we want to have this kind of dashboard. This is what I envision, this dashboard with Block Rewards, where you can start getting paid in Bitcoin. And then you can start seeing your food expenses. You can start seeing your cost of living, housing, you name it, in relation to Bitcoin. So you can visualize what it looks like looking at the world through the lens of Bitcoin. Oh, wow. Because I think otherwise we're talking about it more philosophically. When people actually see it and experience it, that's a whole different experience. It's a whole different mindset shift. And for most Bitcoiners, when you've gone through that shift, the world is a very rosy place. All of a sudden, life is getting easier. We have more capacity to show up how we want to show up. You feel in control. You feel in control, 100%. And so I truly believe the next wave of Bitcoin products, next wave of Bitcoin corporations are really just helping people shift their mindset to looking at the world through the lens of Bitcoin, because it really is a much rosier place. When the pandemic hit, I wasn't deep enough down the rabbit hole at the time when the pandemic hit. And it made me feel very depressed, because I was just like, our monetary system is just kind of degrading our quality of life. I don't quite know where to go from here. And Bitcoin has completely shifted that 100%. And one of the byproducts we're seeing as a result of that is when you look at Bitcoiners are starting to have kids. You see it all the time. And I look at a lot of my friends that are non-Bitcoiners, no one's having kids. People don't even know what the future looks like in a year or two's time. And we're seeing that populations are declining in many countries. Bitcoiners, you're seeing people have kids all the time. It's freaking rad.
Can you talk more about Block Rewards then? So I'm not totally familiar with everything Block Rewards does. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so Block Rewards, so we're basically a startup based out of Kelowna in British Columbia. And our whole goal, Scott, who's the CEO of Block Rewards, he worked in the traditional financial space with pensions, benefits, you name it. And he wanted to kind of bring that into the Bitcoin space. So we want to be able to reward individuals with Bitcoin. We want to compensate individuals with Bitcoin. So we kind of have two main products. One is being built out right now, and one is already built. We've got the savings plan. The savings plan is for individuals that, let's say, hey, I really want to save in Bitcoin. I don't want to have to go to the exchange, send my part of my paycheck to the exchange, transfer it to Bitcoin, send it to my wallet. And so we simplify that process where it can basically be an automatic deduction from your paycheck. Your employer can do this, automatically deduction from your paycheck, purchases Bitcoin straight into your wallet. And so it just
what information are you giving the employer? You're giving the employer some banking information that's different than your like TD bank account or something like that?
No, so at the moment, we're actually focused more on the employer front. So the employer itself will communicate with Block Rewards. Block Rewards will hook up, and then any employees underneath that employer are then able to sign on and be paid a portion of their paycheck in Bitcoin. And then all we need from that employee is a wallet address, which we can also help them through that process. And down the line, we want to try and automate that process, maybe have a more centralized approach to be able to minimize friction. But then the second product that we offer, so that's a savings plan, being able to save in Bitcoin. And then we have something called Motivate, and Motivate is fascinating. And so Motivate, the problem with our traditional financial rails is that it's very costly for those financial rails to be able to transact micropayments for like 10 cents, 20 cents, 50 cents, $1, because the transaction fees are so high. When it comes to Lightning, we can transact at a fraction of a cent. And so if you've got a corporation that's got certain key performance metrics that you're trying to improve, so you want to grow customer retention, you want to improve the amount of Zoom calls your employees are taking each day, well, then we can incentivize them with sats. And so we can say for each Zoom call you take, if you're a salesperson, you're going to get 500 sats. And so all of a sudden we can create these sats flows, which just basically help improve behavior based upon incentive rewards that are all paid out in Bitcoin, because we can do that on Lightning. It's truly profound, and it's really cool to see it growing.
And Lightning, you think the network can handle this kind of stuff as it continues to grow?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then because this is pretty exciting just to hear from you, because a lot of people in our business get paid, the sales team gets paid commissions, but we have a marketing team and a membership team that handle clients and stuff. So I just envisioning this thing, I'm like, holy smokes, are you describing an environment where a commission could come in perhaps to our business, and then we could have like micropayments from a commission hitting where some other members of the team who are all contributing to that sale. But right now, historically in businesses, it's like the sales team gets paid commissions, or, the internal team that's maybe supporting the sales team gets paid a salary. But it'd be really cool, I guess, if a commission was to hit, and the moment that's hitting, I guess micropayments could also get hit out. So not just for attending like a webinar or Zoom, but on something that's happening in the business, you could zap micropayments to different members of the team so they could get rewarded and kind of get incentivized. Absolutely. So like the salespeople got a sale, but they're also getting paid. And I guess you could do that in dollar. There's different ways with bonuses and different structures to do that. But if you could just have that happening in real time when those come in to the business, that would be pretty cool.
It's profound. And yeah. What's interesting is that the challenge we face today is that because our cost of living is constantly rising, it's impacting people's motivation and their productivity and the workplace morale. And so if people are feeling fairly compensated, then all of a sudden, not only does the employee feel supported, but the employer is seeing growth in productivity, and they're seeing growth in their morale inside of the corporation, which may reduce absenteeism. People get taking sick days, you name it. And so there's so many benefits to being able to allow employees to feel like, hey, I feel fairly compensated. I feel like I have greater capacity to show up. And the incentives based, it blows me away as to where this can go, because ultimately, if you think about, let's take any business, and they've got, especially big businesses, they've maybe got a big expense in terms of healthcare. Well, if there's a correlation between every employee that walks 5,000 steps a day has got reduced healthcare expense, well, all of a sudden you can say, well, we're going to send you $5 or $3 through SATs for every time you walk 5,000 steps. And all of a sudden you're reducing the healthcare expense. You're rewarding people. They're feeling fairly compensated. And so we genuinely believe that if you're able to incentivize employees through the right means, through the right channels, it's beneficial for everyone. And so that's one of the things we're focused on.
Seb, we're at the top of the hour. I just have a few more questions. Are you okay still for a few more
Totally.
minutes?
Okay. I've got no time constraint.
Okay. I'm curious, why are you so in tune with that? Because I think about that a lot, that the employee morale at different companies is off because of the monetary system and the way people are being rewarded. Why are you in tune with that so much? I don't understand where that's coming from. That's just your observations of what's going on in the world?
I would say it's my observations. It's also, I have worked a lot of, given that I've been able to have the flow of capital from my investments from real estate, I've worked a lot of jobs that have been purely out of the interest of working that job that hasn't necessarily been able to pay very well. So mountain biking doesn't pay that well, but that means that I work with a lot of low-income workers. And when you're seeing a lot of low-income workers, you're seeing that morale just collapse. People are just being decimated. And this is where I really...
The work ethic itself is destroyed.
Absolutely. And the work ethic in the last, I would say, 5 years has just fallen off a cliff. Service, as I mentioned briefly earlier, like the quality of service these days, people just don't care. And so that's where I think, how are we able to improve this? And I think this is just one huge component of it. People are rewarded and compensated fairly, then that is immense. And so we're at the moment really trying to build out these products so that we can actually support individuals. And we also see it as a way, how do we just orange pill more individuals? If you're an employer and you believe in Bitcoin and you just say, hey, Mr. Employee, look, we're going to start paying you $1 for every time you do XYZ, then all of a sudden they're basically pushed into being orange pilled just by seeing and experiencing the rails, seeing their purchasing power increase. And so we just see it as another means to be able to support the Bitcoin revolution.
So that product's coming out from Block Rewards. That's something you're working on now.
Yeah, so the savings component, being able to receive a portion of the wage, we already have that. Yeah, we already have that. And so any corporation across Canada that is interested in saving in Bitcoin, feel free to reach out and we're more than happy to help out. And that's just blockrewards.ca. And then we're working on, we have all of the rails. We're just working on kind of like incorporating into the site and kind of the front end user experience for the Motivate, which is the incentivized behavioral based Bitcoin stuff.
Yeah, both sound really fantastic. The Motivate one is kind of blowing me away, to be honest. That just seems fantastic. I always thought of micropayments as like, oh, someone's going to rent out the boardroom and maybe you can charge a few cents, and but I didn't think of it from the incentive side of user behavior of what you want people to do. That is fantastic, especially with health stuff. That I think is going to be an interesting product for you guys. Wow, that's exciting stuff. Okay, and then what is your involvement with Looking Glass Education and how did that begin? What are you doing there?
That is, so we spoke briefly offline about Greg Foss. And so Greg Foss is...
the force of nature that is Greg Foss.
The wrecking ball that is Greg Foss as well. Greg Foss is one of the most genuine, one of the most caring, thoughtful people that I've ever met. And Greg reached out, I would say, probably about 5 years ago now. I wrote an article called When More Isn't Better, Inflation in the 21st Century. And it was my first article. I had about 7 followers on Twitter. And I wrote this article describing how inflation is creating wealth inequality. And I don't know how Greg found it, given that I had like 7 followers on Twitter. He found it, read it, and was just like, we need to get more people reading this. We need to get it out to magazines. And so anyway, he managed to get it in a few magazines. I was truly humbled. And then he said, hey, Seb, I know a couple other individuals that are interested in writing to the layperson about our monetary system, about how money impacts society. Would you be interested in maybe jumping on a call and seeing if we can collaborate? And so we jumped on a call, and ultimately it was Daz, my business partner, Greg, another guy called Jason, and another guy called Max. And we founded something called Looking Glass. And Looking Glass is about 4 years old now. And our whole goal with Looking Glass is to speak to the layperson, the wage earner, about maybe why they're feeling the effects of inflation, why they're feeling their cost of living constantly climbing, and really just break it down simply. And it's just grown from there. And it's just been such an incredible journey with such incredible individuals. And now we're at the point where we have all of our content is free. You have deep dives, which kind of like long form, whether it's podcasts, articles. And then we also have a free foundations course. And this foundations course is all about how our monetary system has evolved over time, and then how Bitcoin fits into this new monetary paradigm and the benefits of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin functions. And so if anyone wants to learn more, feel free to just jump onto Looking Glass and you'll see our free foundations course. And we also do help with custody services as well. So if people are interested in taking custody of their Bitcoin and nervous about custody, we can support that as well. And it's called Coddle. So feel free to jump on. But more than anything, I'm just passionate about education and supporting people where they're at, because I think there's not enough content that supports people where they're at today.
What does the next 10 years of Seb's life look like? Did you say 31 at the beginning of this?
31. Yeah.
Like, you're blowing me away here. Like, at 31 speaking the way that you're speaking, like, this is just amazing to me. It's very exciting, Seb, to hear people like you speak the way that you are. What does the next 10 years hold for you? Like, obviously Block Rewards is exciting. Looking Glass Educate, these are great things. The Block Reward stuff that you're working on, just amazing. Sounds fantastic. What does the next 10 years hold for you? Are you honestly, can the body hold up the mountain biking? You were kind of alluding to the fact that the body might not be able to hold up the mountain biking. Hey, you can come to Blue Mountain here in Ontario. I don't know if you've heard of Blue Mountain. It's a little bump that's just north of Toronto. It would take you about 3 seconds to go down Blue Mountain. Maybe you can, change locales or something like that. But I'm being serious. Do you ever think about your future? Like, where you've written a book now on Bitcoin, you're teaching mountain biking, you're involved in Looking Glass Education, you're involved with Block Rewards. What does the next 10 years hold for you?
It's interesting. First off, I should say, like, I really, really appreciate the kind words. It means the world. I think sometimes when you're working from home in your kind of home office, your head's down all the time. And so when you stick your head up and you have these great conversations, these type of conversations really energize me to just keep on creating. But I would say that I used to be very planning oriented. I used to have all of these goals. I used to know what I wanted to do 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, you name it. And I've dropped away from that and lent a lot more into the spiritual approach more recently. And I believe that the world kind of gives us what we need in order to grow. And so I don't tend to think about the future too much anymore outside of, Is this something that motivates me right now? If that's a yes, then hey, I'm going to direct my energy towards that. Because what I realized is that when I start setting these very specific goals and I say, okay, I want to buy a rental property and I want to generate this return and this is how I'm going to do it and this is jurisdiction, all of a sudden I end up boxing myself in. And when I box myself in, I kind of like ignore everything else that's out there and all of the other opportunities. And so I've really, when it comes to Bitcoin, because I've been able to just simply save in this asset that's Bitcoin, that's given me so much more capacity to open my eyes to all of these other opportunities. And so I really am just kind of going with the flow. And I've just been blown away by the opportunities which it's opened up. Like, I never, ever, ever this year, I've been able to have the opportunity to speak in Madeira in Portugal and then fly down and teach a conference down in Nicaragua and then head over to the States a couple of times and speak with these mind-blowingly incredible individuals. And so awesome. I'm truly humbled, and I like to, rather than trying to plan it, I like to allow things to unfold in the way that maybe it was intended to unfold.
Oh, beautiful. Wow. Awesome. And the one thing that you mentioned that I just want to maybe selfishly encourage you to keep is that portal that you mentioned with the prices that are denominated in Bitcoin or however you're going to represent it. That just seems like a game changer to me. So I think you might be really onto something with that kind of visualization, because I've never seen anything like that. And if I could see that, because I've also done some Bitcoin stuff with prices on housing and stuff like that, when you just see it fall like that. So if some of your efforts we could selfishly direct, Seb, in the future to continue evolving with that subject matter, that would be really appreciated. And that's a selfish request on my part. So you could totally ignore that.
No, and I'm so excited just to be able to see where this journey goes. Like, Scott, the founder of Block Rewards, reached out and he basically just said, hey, Seb, would you want to come on board and kind of manage the educational component? And I was just like, absolutely. And so I've done a lot of thinking about, what does this look like? How do we support people in their Bitcoin journey? Because there's a huge aversion to Bitcoin. Most people, when they hear Bitcoin, it's volatile, criminals use it, you name it. And so how do you support people in their journey? And what I've realized through education is that you cannot talk about the solution until people actually understand the problem. And so we first dive into the problem, and we dive into the problem in a way that hopefully meets the user where they're at. Because if you're a mum with 3 kids, you don't want to hear about the intricacies of our monetary system. If you're an economist, you maybe don't want to hear about psychology and behaviorism. And so I think that being able to meet people where they're at, break the problem down on their terms, only then are you able to start talking about the solution. And so that's kind of one of the ways we've approached the educational journey. But it's a journey on our behalf about creating it, and that's been such an awesome opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, well, and you're having an impact. I just want to tell you that there was a 27-year-old guy sent me a text message yesterday with a link to your chat with Robert Breedlove, saying this guy is excellent. Listen to this. So you were having a huge impact on his life. It's for him to take the time to send that over to me and say, hey, I got to listen to this. And I'm like, wow, that's kind of freaky timing. I'm talking to Seb tomorrow. So just so you know, you are having a great impact. And when I listen to you, and I've listened to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of Bitcoin content, you just come across so crisp and clear in your message. You're doing a fantastic job. So please keep going. You're serving all of us out here. So Seb, thank you for what you're doing. Where can people find you? Where are you most active? Is it Twitter or a website? Where can people track you down?
So I would say it's definitely Twitter is where kind of I'm most active, and that's just Seb Bunney, Bunney. And then you can also just check me out at lookingglasseducation. I think it's just lookingglasseducation.com. And the one thing I'll say is, like, when it comes to education, I never want price to be a barrier. And so if anyone's listening to this that maybe doesn't have, they're not in the financial standing to be able to afford maybe The Hidden Cost of Money, the book that I wrote, feel free to just send me a message on Twitter. And if you don't have the financial standing to do so, I'll just give you the ebook for free. And because I just want to be able to make sure that everybody has access to this education. And a lot of the topics we have discussed in this, I don't think I tied this back. The book, The Hidden Cost of Money, that I released back in December, which you kindly purchased, that book dives into all of these topics we've discussed and really ties it together so people can understand the problem. And then it kind of dives a little bit into the solution that is Bitcoin without being overtly Bitcoin orange book. And but yeah, again, Tom, I hugely appreciate you having me on, and I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I can't wait to hopefully meet in person, because I value like-minded individuals, and especially these conversations.
Thanks for that, Seb. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. You can find every new episode of the Your Life, Your Terms show on all the major streaming platforms. So Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. And if you'd like to get free copies of some of the books that we've put together, like these right here, or some of the reports that we've put together, like these right here, you can find all of those at www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's www.rockstarinnercircle.com. That's it for now. Until next time, your life, your terms.